Okay, so this dedication for the brave soldiers protecting the land of Israel and the Jewish people from enemies, and may they be successful in their missions and return home safely unscathed, and also that the hostages are come home as soon as possible.
Amen.
So this week's parasha is Ki Tisa, and it discusses the the census and the incident with the golden calf. So I'll just discuss the census. So census didn't discriminate, and everyone had to contribute a half shekel. And that half shekel, it was a coin, probably made out of nickel uh, or copper, possibly. And that was used in the construction of the Mishkan. But everybody, didn't matter about the financial status of the person. Everybody contributed a half shekel. Even the person was a multimillionaire, that's all they had to give. And a person with limited means also gave it. So there was no discrimination. And they counted the people based on the coins that they were received. Because in Judaism, you can't count people like 1, 2, 3. You say not one, you can't count people. So they used a coin as the instrument for counting people. And I'm just trying to think why you can't directly count people, because it's Damon, just remind me again, please. What's
Okay, so there are two reasons. The one reason on a conceptual basis is that when you count somebody, it could be an ein horror, where it's almost like
yes.
in the case where somebody you want to daven for somebody after they've been diagnosed with cancer in an oncology unit. It takes an open miracle then to cure them. It's better to daven for them before the results come out, so that it doesn't look like an open miracle. So too, when you quantify somebody, where you say this is who you are, you're a number. It doesn't acknowledge the uniqueness of that spiritual soul, that everybody has a different fingerprint. And we have to have two things in mind: that we are like a cog in a mechanical engine, that we form part of a team, and we're an integral part of the team, but yet the world was created for us. So we have to remain humble and not with hubris or arrogance, to know that even the mosquito was created before us, which is why when it buzzes and comes out on Friday night, we must realize if we don't live up to our potential, even the mosquito is more important. But when we do, and we act as a team member and contribute, and it's not about I, then the unique contribution that we have is unlike anybody else. That a part fits in an engine, which without it, the engine wouldn't work. But by the same token, without the team, we don't have significance. And unfortunately, during wokeism, everything is about, you need to identify my pronoun, my gender. Everything is about me. I need to be acknowledged. On what basis must I acknowledge you? Respect is earned. It's not automatic. And that's why we don't do a consensus.
Census. A head count.
It's
Head count, you mean?
consensus about not doing a census with a person's name.
Ah, okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
All right,
That
guys.
was the
Does that make
consensus. Okay.
That was the consensus about doing a
Yeah.
census, because it makes sense not to do it.
Yes, yes.
All right, Gavin, did that explanation that make sense to you?
Very clear. Very
Okay,
good.
good.
Yeah. Both of you were very clear.
Okay, so guys, let me just tell you where we ended. It was a very, very simple premise, okay? And I'm just going to put a couple of bullet points, very, very simple. In the beginning of the Mishnah, it says if you steal a field from the fellow and an extortionist comes towards you and takes it from you as the robber, the law is that if it's a provincial-wide plague, and what do they mean plague? Not that somebody dies from COVID. It means that it seems to infest people on a broad scale, where they either SARS, this Internal Revenue Service, it's a bit sensitive at the moment, that issue, but that that aside, the king's men come and do a mandatory confiscation with everybody in that particular province, then the owner of that field that stole it, or the person that stole it from the owner isn't liable. And you can say, well, how can that be? The person is still robber. Very clear reason. Because when he gets booted off the field, he says to the original owner, what is yours is before you, meaning you can't steal land from somebody. The land ain't going anywhere. You can be ejected off the land, but the land isn't going anywhere. And even if you remained in the land and somebody stole it from you, at the point where there was the taxman or the kingsman that expropriated the land from you through extortion, then you've got no claim against the robber because the robber was booted off the land. Your land is still physically there. If they've taken a hostage of it, it's not the robber's fault. The only time the robber is held accountable is when the land is confiscated because of something he did. So if he's a drug addict or a gambling addict and he owes the mafia money and they kidnap your property thinking it's his, and he never disclosed that he's a robber and he stole it from you and therefore it belongs to you, it's not one of his assets, then he is liable on that account. And if he wants to have the argument, guys, to say he would have been tortured upon death, remember there was the Gemara that said, what happens if the idolaters come to you and want to torture you and you giving over your land? So the Gemara is saying, well, in that case, you're liable. And they say, well, why should you be liable? Because at the end of the day, you would have been tortured. You have to give it over. So the truth of it is, yes, you might be able to, if you're escaping from a criminal, it uses this thing with roidef, where you're escaping with your life and somebody's chasing after you, can damage property in order to escape from your life. You still have to pay back for the property damage. It doesn't say you can't damage the property to escape, but you can't get off the hook as far as that's concerned. And then there's this concept of are you off the hook because your life was in danger at the time that you damaged? Well, that's a much deeper discussion. But in principle, if it wasn't targeted at the robber isn't responsible, because even if the original owner wasn't the land, the the IRS or SARS would have confiscated the property on a provincial-wide basis anyway. Doesn't matter who was on your land. We said, how can somebody rob your land? There's two ways. One of the ways is they extend the boundary markers, because if you're dealing with acres of land, it's difficult to see when you incrementally move the boundary markers every week. The other way is that you almost seize the land where you become a squatter and you've got some very heavy degenerates on the land and nobody's going to throw you out. It's happened in Braamfontein and buildings all over, where corporate buildings in the 70s and 80s, because town and Hillbrow and Yeovil was the Mecca jeweling place and business hub, it became full of Nigerians and crack addicts. Who's going to get rid of the Nigerians there? No one. So that's exactly what we're talking about, the squatter sort of situation. Then it says in the Mishnah, what about the second part of the Mishnah? It seems a repeat of the first part. And we're saying no, when it's referring to this term robber. And remember, there were two terms robbers. There was mazikin and matzikin. One was implying you eat the fruit of your womb, and it's etc., under the speech, and the matzok, that your enemy will oppress you. Matzok means oppression. So in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 53 and verse 42, it's talking about the 53, the verse about matzok being an oppression because you're being extorted. Matzikin connotes oppression. And then it says, well, then what's this thing with the sakar and the salatzal, the locust, will inherit? Though they say it's also like a locust, and that a locust comes without your permission and just strips you of your land. It's like a thief. So whether you're talking about an extortionist or a robber, either way, it's a test. So then the second part of the Mishnah says, look, end of the day, it seems a repeat of the first. What are we talking about here? And what are we talking about here, Kevin, is an informer. Arthur explained it beautifully yesterday. Just when you think he's not listening and he's slightly on autistic scale, he comes out with Rain Man, where he could run a casino and bet against the horses and win every time. So don't underestimate Arthur. He's gifted. So I'm just saying that, Arthur, because you never did forget that savant comment. You've never forgiven me.
Yeah, that's one of those things. So basically what Damon's trying to say in a nutshell, okay, there are three different ways, okay, to summarize his 20-minute speech. Firstly, the first way is you steal the property incrementally, and then there's the government or the IRS comes and takes the land. Therefore, he's not a robber. Okay. The other way, when he is a robber, is he's got a gambling debt or he's betting on something. There's a drug lord or whatever, and they come and take, thinking it's his land, but they take your land. And the third way is he's a snitch. He reports you to the IRS for something you've avoided or something you've done, and they come seize your land.
Correct. The only thing I mentioned in the first place in terms of robbery is the two types of robbing. The one is squatting, and the other one is being a legitimate neighbor and moving the boundary markers. But in principle,
they actually have a problem with that in America as well. You know that, James. What people do is they go to houses that people have left, and as they stay there over time, they actually get all the utilities changed into their name, and they check the title deed. It's like they got a rule in America or something, and they buy it for a couple of dollars.
So they actually abandon the house. In the Gemara, it's if you have a chazaka and you're there for more than 3 years, you've got a claim to the land unless you've got a rental contract. And you have this, guys, by the way, in civil law marriage, that if you stay with somebody for X amount of years, I think in South Africa it's over 5 years, they become your civil law wife, even if you never officially married them in a ceremony, and you have to pay them alimony. There have been many guys that have ended up having a wonderful relationship and woke up one day to find half their assets gone. So so let's get back to the share, but Arthur's completely correct. So the second part of the mission, exactly as Arthur's talking about, is somebody that costs you money as if they were, inverted commas, Kevin, a robber, but they never actually took possession of your property, so to speak. And in that particular case, they deemed liable for costing you money by informing SARS that you had assets, even though you had declared that you didn't have the asset. Okay? But Kevin, on that last note, as Arthur said, what we've got to do is we discussed yesterday what the chidush is. And the chidush is as follows. There's two aspects of it. Okay? The first aspect, I'm not going to put Gavin through asking him because I know he's been under a lot of pressure today. So all I'm saying is, Gavin, let me just tell you what we're talking about here, is that there's a case of there's something called there's like indirect damage, right? There's din dina groma, which is judging the law of Galmi. So you've got direct damage and you've got indirect. And another way you can think of indirect damage is actually causative. So what we are saying is there's two ways to steal. The one is to actually physically seize somebody's land. And then it says the case of extortionists that take it from you, etc., etc. There's the other case of what you call causing somebody's land to be seized. So there's a difference between shooting somebody and paying somebody to shoot somebody. The one is causative, meaning you set a chain of events by the catalyst of paying the hitman, and therefore the consequence is the same. But there are Talmudic opinions that say, from a legal standpoint, you're not liable for causative damage, only if you directly kill the person, because there can be no agency through transgression. We said the person knows the laws, the hitman knows what the halacha is, etc., etc., know that you shouldn't kill. So therefore, he gets the death penalty. In Shemaim, they hold both responsible. The other aspect of causative damage is this thing that speech itself is not deemed necessarily by all opinions to be damage. Why? Because it's just words. If you throw a brick at somebody and you hit them, it's different to telling somebody else to throw a brick at them. You don't know if the person's going to take you up on the deal or not. So because there's a disconnect, and even though you inform SARS of this person's assets, you don't know if SARS will take action. So you can't be sure that speech would result in this chain of events. It's possible, it's plausible, it's probable, it's not definite. Okay, so those are the minutiae of aspects as far as that's concerned. So you've got two schools of thought. The one is that Garmi, indirect or causative damage counts, and another one is that it doesn't. And let me give you a perfect example. You remember there was Rav Oshia and Rav Chia that discussed about discernible and indiscernible damage. What did we mention? And we're going to go through this in the Gemara. Kevin is actually one of the few here that has done Chazorah. is it's going to talk about tuma and truma and all sorts of things where you cause an action that creates it unusable. But there's no discernible damage to the quality of the wine. It's not fit for a Jew to consume. Chametz, for example, if you keep chametz during Pesach, you can't use it after Pesach. Now, is that Shevis Regal being damaged in any way? No. And a person, according to some opinions, can return the Shevis Regal after Pesach and says, I haven't done any damage. What is yours is before you. I took your Shevis Regal, it's there back. You've got no recourse. I didn't steal it. And other opinions that say it's not good enough. Indiscernible damage is still payable damage. There are two schools of thought. And that's where we're coming to with the second case of the informer. We also said there's this issue with the Ramban and Rashi and talking about an informer that according to a certain interpretation, you have to deal with a habitual informer. Why? Because, Gavin, if you remember in Babylon, knasim, penalties are not paid out. Only compensatory damage is paid out. So therefore, if you're talking about a case where under normal circumstance, they wouldn't give a penalty, but if somebody is a pathological repeat offender, they get a fine even in Babylon. You get what I'm saying? And therefore, there was the second part that was brought in the Mishnah, and it's how it relates. And there was a certain man who showed the extortioner stores of wheat from the Exilarch, or whatever it's called. It's actually the big honcho that, according to the Roman authorities in a vassal state, would be the leader of the Jewish people. It'd be the go-between between the Romans and the Jewish people. It'd be the leader, but not the rabbinic leader, guys. The, what do you call it? The socio-political. You could have in certain countries a chief rabbi that's great at politics and social norms and adeptness, but he's not the people that would be the Gadol Hador, the posek of the generation. He would be what you call the face of the community rabbi in terms of that country, the chief rabbi. They're two different roles. So we're saying somebody ratted on him, and then the government came to take stores of wheat from him. And then the case came before Rav Nachman to be judged and obligated him to pay. So now Rav Yosef is sitting behind Rav Huna Bachia because they sat in rows of who was on what level. And Rav Huna Bachia was sitting behind Rav Nachman. And Rav Huna Bachia said to Rav Nachman, who made this ruling, I want to know, does this ruling emerge from the law of damages, or is it simply a fine? In other words, is it a compensatory payment? Because according to normative tort law, which we said is if you cause somebody a loss, you have to redress the wrong and pay compensation for the damage you caused them. That's normative tort law, T-O-R-T. It can be taught, Kevin, T-A-U-G-H-T, but it's tort law. Tort means
contorted.
Yeah. So taut. If you have a rope that is taut, it means it's tight. So it means there are boundaries within a society that if you create damage, restitution is made. And therefore, if it's normative tort law at which it's compensation, whether it's in Babylon or not, it has to be paid. But more than that, according to this issue of Rav Huna Bachia, he's saying that when you have a case at which normative tort law applies and it's compensation, you can then extrapolate the principles of that case and extend it to similar cases. If it's a kanas, a fine, you can't. You simply can't. Because the fine is about an individual case and cannot be extrapolated to other cases. So he wants to know, what's the basis? So Rav Nachman said to him, look, it's derived from a Mishnah. And it says if the field was taken on account of the robber is obligated to provide the owner with another field, whether it's money or similar field, etc. And the Mishnah has been established as speaking of somebody in the second part of our Mishnah specifically. That's why it's come up, this whole discussion of somebody who showed the field of another to extortionists. And we can see from this Mishnah that normative law, tort law demands payment from one who shows his fellow property to another and causes that property to be confiscated. So anyway, after Rav Nachman left, Rav Yosef said to Rav Huna Bachia, he obviously was a little upset with him. He said, what difference does it make to you? Honestly, because apparently some opinions say he was a bit irritated and he dismissed and others say Rav Yosef wasn't irritated at all. In fact, he was curious because Rav Huna bar Chia he respected greatly, and he said, well, you asked that question for a reason. I want to know what difference does it make for you, because there's obviously a reason, because the result is the same. Either way, Rav Nachman asked that that person pay the exhalak for the loss it cost him, and that's where it goes through my answer, where Rav Nachman's ruling, if it's based on a fine, you can't extrapolate the principle to similar cases where if it's a normative tort law and it's compensation, you can. And that was Rav Huna bar Chia's assumption. But the first thing we've got to do, guys, is question that assumption, because Rav Yosef doesn't agree. According to Rav Yosef, he's saying even if it's a fine, there's no reason why you can't take a case where a fine came about and have a similar case and say that in another similar case, a fine doesn't come about. Because why wouldn't it, according to Rav Yosef? If a fine came about because of a certain situation, why can't you learn that a fine would not come out if there was a similar situation? Why does it have to be only compensatory in nature or normative tort law? And that's where the Ramban says, if you're talking about a fine, the only way that you could have it backed up by Rav Yosef is to say that it must be a chronic informer or a habitual offender. Therefore, they would enforce a fine in Babylonia. Otherwise, they wouldn't. Even generally, even if it's a ruling on a case as opposed to a extraction of law. So we're going to discuss this in a bit of detail. Does it make sense what I've said to you guys? Does it make sense what I've said to you guys?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, but Gavin, considering I've explained this to you and Kevin and Arthur, I think I've done my best to summarize it now of a lot of pages and a few concepts. Arthur said I've been going on for 20 minutes, but I've been dealing with different nuances of the case. So Arthur, I want you to give it over. Crickets. Arthur, you even there? Okay. Silent treatment. Arthur, you even there, buddy?
He might be, but it's difficult to it's tricky to answer that. We don't know it as well as you. We just got a very good idea.
So all I'm saying is it's not just three little ideas. There's a whole interplay of factors here.
No, sure, you wouldn't talk that long, otherwise you'd say it in three sentences as well. Obviously, you covered a much bigger scope. We understand that. Sure.
Okay, there are about 14 different factors interplaying here. 14. About.
Okay, I'll count to 13, but I won't argue with you.
Okay, tell me the 13 and I'll tell you.
No, I was only joking. Don't mess with me. I'll accept 14. I'm happy with that. I'm wrong. I made a mistake. He's 14.
Okay, I think I could be even wrong. I could think maybe they're more, but all right. So Rav Yosef questions Rav Huna bar Chia's assumption again. Kevin, Rav Huna bar Chia's assumption is the reason why he wanted to know if it's normative tort law with compensation or a kanasa penalty. Is he wants to know that even though Rav Nachman made him pay the exhalak for costing him money by informing that he had this asset, in future, can you derive other cases from it or not? And according to Rav Huna bar Chia, you can't if it's a kanas, but you can if it's compensatory in nature because it falls within tort law. Okay, but Rav Yosef doesn't agree. He said you can even extrapolate cases of a fine to other cases of a fine. Okay, now that we're there, Arthur, you back. You hearing me? Did you go? But sometimes it's difficult to give a share if you don't have somebody who's even present.
You don't mute, Arthur.
I'm back. Sorry, somebody called me for tomorrow, the client. By the way, I wanted to ask you something. I was thinking about it earlier, Damon. The two types of thieves, you know, where the squatter and the person that steals slowly over time.
Yeah.
Okay. They're two different words because for a thief and a robber, because the one is actually blatantly doing it, showing he's stealing it, and the other one is doing it slowly, kind of like he's more worried about what people think.
Excellent, Arthur.
No.
I didn't think of it, but I didn't think of it. Arthur's completely correct. It uses this term robber, and the truth of it is the one is a thief, because the thief does it surreptitiously in a sneaky way that you can't determine it, and the robber just squats on your land. Arthur, you are completely correct there. Well done.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it now because that's the same thing we had earlier with the thief and the robber.
I think
he's doing the same thing.
Insight.
And what is a gunner?
Yeah.
Is a gunner a thief or a robber? Or
That's my
one?
cat. It's my cat.
And
my
your
cat's
cat.
called Gunner. Gunner is somebody
thief?
who can.
It's normally a thief, but I mean, does it mean robber
does it in
as
front
well?
of you?
No,
Well, then my son, I'm gonna sure. I appreciate it. I don't think I'm gonna sure. I think so. Okay, anyway, carry on. I'll keep quiet.
Gavin, there are two different terms. So Ganef is a Ganef is a thief, and a robber is a shoyded.
Not a Gazlan.
Okay, so they are completely different words.
In
Okay,
Hebrew, it's a
perfect.
shoyded. A Gazlan is a robber in Aramaic, but it's Aramaic. It is that is an Aramaic term, Gazlan. Because he Gazlans your Coke without permission. Guzzling down your Coke. So, all right, guys, let's just
Kevin,
go.
you should have enjoyed that. Kevin, why didn't you laugh? Kevin?
Oh, it's very good.
Is that where we get the word guzzler from? You're a guzzler, and
Yes.
then you.
Lovely your time.
I mean,
James?
so yeah.
Is that where we get the word guzzler? Somebody who drinks just down something and not
Yeah.
know.
I think
And
that's
those
it.
car guzzlers, and that's highway robbery does, because the amount of petrol those guzzler cars take.
It's true.
So it actually makes sense. That's how you can remember. The
So
word guzzler from a guzzling car.
So listen, we'll deal on Saturday night with this thing about discernible damage and not discernible damage with penalties, etc. I just want to give you a hint for a few minutes, and that is, by law, if it's indiscernible damage, there's no compensatory damage because you haven't actually damaged that person's product. So that would be a penalty to deter somebody from spiritually infecting your product where it's rendered unusable. But you haven't damaged it. You haven't left wine in the sun to turn it into vinegar. The qualitative nature is the same. And therefore, that is actually a penalty. Okay? Not compensatory in nature as such. Do you see why?
Can you just repeat this example? Sorry, because I am concentrating. I didn't hear you 100%, and I need to hear this, otherwise I won't understand properly. Can you just repeat this example?
Okay, so if you sullied somebody's produce like wine, and you've had it over Pesach and it's whiskey, for example, and you return it to somebody after Pesach, and you say your whiskey is before you, your scotch is before you. Now, it was prohibited during Pesach, and you can never use it. You actually haven't damaged their wine. You gave them what is theirs before them, almost like when you do you get what I'm saying? So in that particular case, it's not compensatory in nature because you've compensated the person by giving them the wine. So that has to be a rabbinical penalty to stop somebody from doing it. But compensation is only when you broke the bottle and you have to technically return it, a new one, because you broke it. You have to compensate what you damaged. But here, it's indiscernible. It's a concept. It does render it impermissible to use, but there's not physical damage to the property. And therefore, the rabbis instituted a rabbinic fine to prohibit a Jew from damaging another Jew's property conceptually. But it's not like as if you took wine, Gavin, and left it in the back of your car, and it became off, and it turned to vinegar, and you actually damaged the qualitative nature. Then that's compensatory damage. But according to rabbinic opinions, some hold that if you can return somebody's wine if you make it tumah or you use it whiskey during Pesach afterwards, and as long as you return it, there's nothing you can do. That person can do because you returned it intact. What is yours is before you. But other rabbinic opinions say you have to pay for it, but that's considered a knas, a penalty, not compensation, because compensation is technically for damage done, and that damage is not discernible. And that's why we're going to learn these cases of fines. Can you extrapolate the principle of the case and apply to similar cases? If it's a fine according to Rav Huna Bar Chia, you can't. According to Rav Yosef, you can. And this is where the argument is going to come.
Okay, thank you.
Guys, I know
Sorry,
I do know the Gemara.
You say that this is a case where someone spoiled someone's wine or made it undrinkable or just damaged it completely, that it's unusable, undrinkable.
Well, there's a difference between making it undrinkable because it's spiritually prohibited, or compared to if you damage the quality of the product. If you damage the quality of the product or drop the bottle or even return the wine in a poorer state of quality, that's compensatory damage, which is normative tort law of paying for the wrong you've done. But if you infected it with spiritual impurity, you can't sue on that basis because it's an ethereal concept. It's not compensation. That's a penalty the rabbis installed in order to deter people from damaging somebody else's product spiritually, because it renders it unusable.
Are they completely different amounts?
It's not about the amount. It's about is it discernible, indiscernible damage with Rav Chia and Rav Oshia. And it was in the third daf, Gavin.
No, I'm saying, is the penalty a higher? Do you pay more for a penalty than you do for compensation, or is it case by case?
No, well, compensation, you pay exactly the damage you caused, and the penalty, if you remember in the case of Keren, it was half that of the compensation. In other cases, it might be even more than the damage to deter somebody. But I'm just saying that's a distractant. The amount is a distractant. The concept here is a completely different thing.
All right, no, I'm just listening. No, I'm sure we're still going to touch on it. We're going to carry on tomorrow. Saturday night, sorry.
Yeah, do you get what I'm saying? One gets distracted if you looked at the amount of money being a factor. That's not a factor here. The factor is, can you learn similar legal cases from a kanas, a penalty, or not? According to Rav Chia Bar Huna, no. According to Rav Yosef, yes. And that's why I asked Rav Nachman the question. Because he wanted to know how's the law derived. Is it compensatory in nature or penalty?
Yeah. All right, so we're going to find out.
Okay. Arthur, I didn't just waffle for X amount of time. These are all very specific issues. And I'd love you to give it over on Saturday night before I take it from this point.
What waffle?
You added the cream to it, Damon. It wasn't just waffling on its own. It wasn't just basic.
Look, I gave a summary, you made it in depth. That's the difference. I skim like the surface, and you go right down to the core, which makes you a better professor than me. Because
That's why he's the Rosh Hashiva.
I just know the basics. Yeah, but you see,
Yeah.
Damon, I've got to, how can I say, dumb it down to the rest of us, because we're not as smart as you.
Oh, very funny.
Yeah.
You guys are all super.
No, we're not.
Nonsense.
Seriously, Damon, you're in a different league. Kind of like what
Yeah.
takes you 10 minutes to learn will take us like 3 days. You know, that's sort of the.
Hang
What's
on.
in
Yeah, you're so kind, Arthur. Thanks for thinking us that we're so smart. It'll take about a week.
You know,
I'm sorry.
when Arthur, you were coping when we were learning Bava Basra together for 5 hours on that Friday night. You were coping perfectly with me.
You never saw him running outside for his anti-anxiety.
Yeah, Dan, you must remember the parts where you like, you know, how can I say? Like, I'd go, what? You'd explain to me again. It's like, you know me. I'm not as smart as you, Dan. Look, when I grasp it, I'm good, and I can understand it, and I can summarize it. Just getting to understand and grasp it is my problem, you know?
Well, listen, if I'm lost, Arthur's